Hello, everyone. I think that we are officially live here. I just want to make sure that our sound quality is good and everyone can hear us. If you want to just throw something into the chat box and let us know if you can hear us okay. Dr. Nick, if you want to say a few things so we can make sure your sound is good.
New to webinar jam. Where's the chat box located? Here we go.
You don't worry about that. Awesome. Right. We have people from everywhere. I am loving this. This is awesome. So I just want to take a moment to say that, we have a lot of people that are joining us tonight. We're super, super excited about it. I personally feel like Dr. Nick and the work that he does with human behavior and mental health is almost like our best kept secret, because it's been something that
we have a Canadian. Sorry.
you found the chat box.
Yep.
But it's been our best kept secret because this is something that has really been accessible to a lot of our patients that are going through integrative programs, but we haven't necessarily opened it to other people to understand a little bit more about the work. But we're definitely going to talk more about DeMartini and how Dr. Nick got into this and why it's something that we feel is so, so important. But I do want to just get acquainted with you guys, because I know that there's a lot of people here that probably have no idea who we are and why we do this work. So I want to make sure that we take a moment to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to actually pull up our slides here just so we can stay on track. But for those of you that are new here, Dr. Nick and I, we're husband and wife. So there'll be an interesting dynamic that you'll get to see tonight. But secondary to that is we are also business partners. We've been practicing for 10 years here in New Jersey, and it has been quite an evolution. And one of the biggest things that we have seen in people with all different types of health conditions, chronic illness, autoimmunity, is that there is usually some level of emotional involvement. And that could be from emotional adversities when, in childhood, it could be from PTSD, it could be from loss, it could be from grief. But, these are things that we cannot ignore when it comes to human health, mental health. And we feel that it's really important for people to know that there are other modalities out there and other opportunities out there to really shift how we are feeling and thinking about different experiences in our lives. And, we've made it one of our missions to bring this information to people. And in 2021, we're not just talking about grief and loss, but we're talking about relationships. We're talking about bullying. We're talking about social media. We're talking about never feeling good enough. We're talking about the comparison game. And, we're really trying to shed light and provide new perspective on how to step into these situations differently outside of what we've all been told is the best approach, which, really comes back to our conventional psychotherapy and psychiatry. Some people that is going to create massive benefits, but a lot of you, unfortunately, that are here right now are here probably because you're looking for new, fresh perspective, because you haven't necessarily been able to heal from the things that you've experienced, and you're looking for new options and new alternatives. And that's really what it's all about tonight, is bringing a different perspective. And when it comes to this idea of conventional versus integrative, some of you might be like, what the heck is integrative medicine? I don't even know what you're talking about. That is okay. We get that response all the time. But, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to look at the whole person. We're trying to look at every element that keeps us feeling stuck, that keeps us feeling sad or anxious, or keeps us not feeling our best. And, when it comes to different things we've experienced in our lives, like loss, sometimes it's harder to cope with loss when we don't feel well, when we know that our health is not in a good standing. it compromises everything from how much you're outputting stress hormones to how much you are actually producing those feel-good hormones. So imagine, having some type of loss in your life when you've been dealing with chronic digestive issues and you have practically no serotonin levels, which help you to feel good and experience joy. So now the fact that you're experiencing this type of event creates an even bigger impact, and it almost feels like it's too much to even bear because physiologically your body is not in a good place. So these are some things that we're also shedding light on, is the bigger picture behind, what can be happening in your mind, but also happening in your body that is creating more obstacles to healing from these different events. And I'm sure you're curious how we got into this. I'm going to tell my story, and then I want Dr. Nick to dive in. But for myself, our stories are so different. That is for sure. But, I will say is that I got into more of the integrative practitioner side, and I was stubborn as anything. And yes, I had emotional adversities when I was young, and there was a lot of anger and violence in my household. And, there was a lot of feelings of abandonment, and there was a lot of resentment. But, I kind of pushed forward. I grew up, and I tried to make a better life for myself. And I definitely had a lot of anger that was built up, but I felt that, time passed. So I was able to just kind of push it away and move on. And when I started to go through my own healing process and I started to reveal all of these different things that were going on in my body, I had significant mercury toxicity. I had a lot of different gastrointestinal infections. And when I started to heal, I started to become more aware of how much some of the things physiologically were impacting my behaviors. And I started to notice positive changes with holding grudges, being angry, being out of control with my emotions. But I hit a plateau. And I hit a plateau because that wasn't it for me. There were other elements that I needed to work through and not just stuff away and hope for the best. And I'm fortunate that Dr. Nick has a deep, deep passion for this type of work, because if it wasn't for him, I don't know where I would be mentally and emotionally. And I think that I would have had a lot of excuses and been a victim to my past if I didn't have the ability to work through it using the DiMartini methodology and all of the other methodologies that you've really brought together. So I want to hand this off to you because I know that your story is very different, and being able to share really why you're so driven by this work.
Yes, our stories are very different. The thing that I came to, I'm going to reverse engineer my story, and reverse engineering it by learning one of the main foundational principles with the DiMartini method is that our values, what's most important to us, actually comes from the creation of our voids. So what we perceive as missing in our life actually ends up being what we want to fill our life up with, what becomes most important to us. And when we do that, we actually become inspired. And it took me a while to get clarity on really my voids because I was chasing so many things. But when I was in 7th grade, my first major void in healthcare came from my mom being diagnosed with stage 1 cancer at that time. And I'm from the Midwest, and we didn't talk about her situation at all. She had chemo, she had radiation, she had a mastectomy. She would come home. Every time she came home from the hospital, she lost more and more hair until she was pretty much completely bald. And I would hear her throwing up, and she would try to hide how much weak she was, because she was actually one of kind of the center. It's the mom. It's like you're a strong center of the foundation of families. And I would literally cry myself to sleep because I didn't want to create her pain, but I was so nervous that I was going to lose my mom, and I didn't understand cancer, and nobody really could explain it well anyways. Not too many people understand cancer. Even most doctors don't even really understand cancer, unfortunately. Besides the point. But really, that was a big void. And one of the things I remember her saying all the time is, why do such bad things happen to such good people? And that was just like on rumination with my mind over and over and over. And I realized, reverse engineering, that was a very polarized mark, bad things, good people. It's one side or the other. There's black and white and no grayness to that statement. And it just stuck with me over and over and over. Fast forward, I had total to date now about 13 concussions. And it was back in the day when most people didn't understand what post-concussion syndrome was, unless you had post-concussion syndrome and you were dealing with those effects of it. But for me, one of the things is that I was an emotional dark place. I had a good life on paper, everything was perfect, but I had so much like rage and anger, and I didn't know why. I went to the traditional therapist, and they do all these cognitive behavior tests and said that my memory is fine, everything was good, but I was fucking angry, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And unfortunately, I used tools that weren't the best tools, but I used alcohol. And I was literally drinking pretty much every single night, most nights, to get blackout drunk so I wouldn't feel the pain anymore. And finally got to a point that I was at such a low, I'm like, this is not working for the quality of my life. And weirdly enough, I actually got injured, and I went and saw a chiropractor, and it was the best I'd ever felt. And realizing that it was just a nervous system stimulation that really helped me function at a higher level than what I had before. But I hit a plateau pretty quick with just the chiropractic. But I knew there's more to it, so I went to chiropractic school, learned all through chiropractic, and that was actually when I was first introduced to the DeMartini method and Dr. John DeMartini and everything else that he teaches. And that really kind of set me up to pretty much, I was taking my own health into my own hands to figure out what I needed to do to heal myself, because I'd been to a bunch of neurologists, I've been to a bunch of therapists, and nobody was really giving me answers and helping me. And bringing this long story short, I had to do neurological exercises to better my brain, to connect my brain to my body. I had, from the gut-brain axis, I had a lot of GI issues that weren't the traditional GI issues, because the majority of them were actually caused neurologically and not so much by infections. But then what happened is that my immune system was depressed from all of this, and I did get a couple infections. Won't go into those gross stories of the detox. But my last pretty much major thing was I still just wasn't me, and I knew it. And the last piece was the mental emotional aspect. And for whatever reason, I don't know if I'm just a slow learner from Iowa in the Midwest, but I kind of forgot about the DeMartini method, and I learned probably about a dozen techniques, all on different mental, emotional, energetic techniques. And some of them were actually pretty good at relieving stress in the moment. But soon as I responded back to a trigger, everything came back rushing in, and I would have to go through the process. And I was like, there has to be something more sustainable. And then I forget the exact happening, but I went back into the DeMartini method and learned that. I think I read his book again, one of his first ones, The Breakthrough Experience. And then I attended his first seminar that you have to attend with him. It's called The Breakthrough Experience. And I DeMartini'd my mom with that. And I realized that, and in that moment, my mom and I did not have a great relationship because her cancer had actually came back stage 4 this time. It had metastasized to almost every single bone in her body. And that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And it was shortly in that time frame when the cancer came back to stage 4 that I got introduced to the DeMartini method, or reintroduced to the DeMartini method. And we were not having a good conversation, my mom and I, and we were disagreeing a lot because I was wearing my doctor hat, especially the holistic side of things, and I was judging her actions on what she was doing to take care of herself. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was pretty much working out of fear. I had fear that I was going to lose my mom. I wanted to show her the life that I was going to create. I wanted to have a lot more time with her. If Dr. Nicole and I do have kids, I wanted her to be around to see and have the grandkids. So I was being very, very selfish. And going through the DiMartini method, what I realized, kind of bringing everything into harmony, is that I was pushing all of my values onto her. And that was the opposite of what love is. True love is really looking at somebody and loving them for who they are. And this isn't always easy because we think we may know what's best for them. But the lie is that that's the reflective mind, is that's what we should do for ourselves, because we all have a perception of what's good and bad when we're going to get deeper into this. But when you realize that everything is both good and bad, nothing is just good and nothing is just bad. And we can change our belief system and our awareness to actually see that, we become empowered, and then we can actually serve ourselves, but we can understand and love and serve others according to what's most important to them. And soon as I did that, I didn't even have a conversation with my mom about the work that I had been doing, but our relationship changed amazingly overnight. And all I did was change my perspective of what was the relationship with my mom and I. And ever since then, we've had a really close, beautiful relationship. So the method has changed my life tremendously, just both personally, but I also find it clinically to be very empowering. And when you get into integrative medicine, what we do is we look at the physical, the chemical, the emotional, the energetic, and the spiritual aspects of who we are. And that mental component, if we don't take care of that, we're missing an aspect of who we are. So I found that sustainability, the DiMartini method, has by far changed our practice and the results that we can get in care as well.
Yeah, and I think that a big thing to drive home here is that, we don't know what we don't know. And, it's none of it is anyone's fault. And when it comes to loss, there is so many scenarios that we play in our mind of how it could have been prevented, how it could have gone differently, how you should have had this conversation or that conversation. And we have all of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And that just produces massive amounts of guilt. And it is something that is so unbelievably paralyzing to us. But we have to understand is that, things do occur the way that they're supposed to. And to live in a place of the shoulda, coulda, woulda is, you're creating scenarios that are probably not realistic in order to cope in whatever way you're coping. And I think it's important when, as we go through tonight, is keeping this top of mind, is that, not living in the place of guilt of, what you should and could have done, but knowing that none of this is your fault, and being able to, shift your perceptions. And to be here is a huge step, and to start doing different things and implementing different methodologies that can help you still love that individual, but be able to not necessarily have the massive roadblocks and hold you back in your life. Because I know in our rational minds, we always say that, I know this person wouldn't want me to be sad. And I know this person, would want me to move on with my life, but I can't. And, being able to use some aspects we're going to discuss tonight to see how you can take that first step. Because like Dr. Nick said, is this methodology has not just changed our lives, but it's changed a lot of people's lives. So most of us have never been given tools. And, when I talked about this a little bit today on social media, is I was talking about how, the tools that we have at our fingertips that are the conventional tools that are offered is talk therapy. And then when talk therapy isn't necessarily getting us to our goal, that is when we resort to manipulating biochemistry. And, one thing that I want to say about psychotherapy, and I would love for Nick to talk about this more, is we are talking about a story that a story that has occurred, and potentially a story that we've created. Because what I'm saying is that, we have all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And we have this story that we talk through over and over again. And what we don't realize is we're actually creating stronger neurological pathways around that story. And this is something that makes it so much more difficult to overcome in the future. And this is usually what causes us to now have to resort to different types of medications that will manipulate our physiology, because now these neurological pathways are so strong. And if we also have underlying issues that we're unaware of, like gastrointestinal issues or different types of neuroinflammatory conditions that are completely compromising the hormones that calm us down and calm our stress, and then we have a minimal amount of our feel-good hormones, the hormones that help us experience joy, that help us experience fun, that help us to just be able to stay motivated in our lives, then we have this perfect storm that now makes us rely on having to manipulate these pathways. And in some scenarios, this is really necessary, but it should never be a long-term solution. And we're really excited about bringing more tools to people to know that there are other things out there that can really help to shift your thoughts, your perceptions of how you not only deal with grief and loss, but how you show up in your relationships, how you talk to your kids, how you talk to your spouse, how you show up to work. And, these are things that we're going to talk about tonight, but we're also going to be talking a lot about as we move into the new year. Did
you want me to talk a little bit about that as well?
I figured you had something to say.
I always have something to say. But, you're 100% right. When I look at the body, both Dr. Nicole and I look at the body very integrative, but we have our quote-unquote passions. And her passion is biochemistry, so that tends to be where she starts looking at things and then expands. My passion is the mental emotional side of things, so that's where I start and expand. But really, every single system of the body affects every other system of the body. You can have stomach issues that were created from a mental imbalance that created a brain imbalance, and then the brain that connected to the stomach was actually the driver for that. That was the start of my case in my brain injuries. But then again, you can have a stomach problem that's affecting the parietal cells of the stomach, which makes your serotonin, your feel-good neurotransmitter, which like Dr. Nicole was saying, and that could really affect you. And that could affect you feeling good, but it's not the only culprit. So it's pretty much that raises the threshold for us to have a symptom. But for us to feel symptoms, we always have more than one system involved. And that's a big thing that I find with incorporating this mental emotional work, is that it's really hard to sustainably correct our issues, our problems, our diagnoses without pretty much dabbling at least a little bit into that mental emotional arena. So tonight we're going to start with some myths, and then we're going to crush those myths about grief, and we will move on.
So do you want to give people a little bit of a background of the foundation of this technique as we get into the myths, so they have a little bit more of a foundation?
I can do it. I'll do a little bit. I wanted to do more of the teaching just as we went on the myths, but I will give some foundation. Sometimes I forget this is the reason I love this so much is because it's like left brain and right brain. So your left brain is my science doctor brain, and my right brain is more of the creative, emotional, artistic mind. And this method is very artistic, but it's really based off of science. Because when you look at the emotions, that's more of quote unquote right brain, but you look at the science, the data, the physics, that's more of the left brain. And that's really what Dr. John has compiled together to create this. And what I mean by that is that everything in science is really foundationally based off of physics. And scientists don't like that, but physicists do. When you look at physics, all physics, the foundation of physics is energy. So we're made up of energy. The computer you're looking at is made up of energy. All energy is just particles. And when particles get dense enough, then it turns into matter. That's like Einstein talked about. It's really the energy or the field of energy that actually dictates the particle. So when we think about that concept, it's our mind, our thoughts that are energy that really dictate the quality of us, our physical being. And taking that, really that further, is that when we look at energy, there's a lot of laws and principles that dictate how energy really displays itself. And one of the foundational ones is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And this is a major, major foundation, especially in this grief that we're going to get deeper in, is that energy is not created or destroyed. It's only transferred into a different form. And another major principle of looking at energy is that energy is always balanced. And this can be easy to think about by looking at a magnet. So a magnet is just a form of energy, and it has a positive and a negative polarity to it. So when you put opposite ends, they attract, the like kind of push each other apart. But the interesting aspect is if you have a magnet, which is bipole, and you cut that magnet in half so you have two magnets, we don't have two monopoles, we still have two bipoles. So we have positive, negative, and positive, negative. And we can keep cutting that magnet in half and half and half, and it will keep doing the exact same process of maintaining that equal and opposite reaction of positive and negative over and over and over. So when we take that principle, we can understand that nothing can be just bad and nothing can be just good, because the bad is quote unquote negative and the good is quote unquote positive. So you always have a bad with a good with a bad. We get down into it. We have the sinner, we have the saint, we have nighttime, we have daytime. In science, we have the sympathetic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, we have yin, we have yang. Everything's works in duality in the universe that we live in.
But I think this is also based on your lens. And I think that people need to understand that is that, you know, when we want to talk about ourselves, we of course want to showcase a lot of our positive traits. But if we were to be honest with ourselves or other people, we would also state that we are, you know, we yell sometimes, we get mad sometimes, we've been rude sometimes, we've been disrespectful sometimes. And this is all different things that we have to understand, is that there is always both happening. So this is going to be really relevant when it comes to talking about grief, because it's about acknowledging, you know, what is really happening in the event of this loss. Just a side note too, I do have a few people that have raised their hand to speak. We actually are going to be doing some live questions a little bit later. So just hang in there and we'll make sure that we get to you. If you do have specific questions as we go along, please make sure to throw them in the chat box and we will answer them as we go.
That's all I was going to say, is that if you write your question down, we'll compile them and then we'll answer as many as we can towards the end.
Okay, so let's get in. Before
you say the myth, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said, is that you're 100% right. So it's like if I say that you're always nice, that everything you do is uplifting, blah, 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 you're going to disagree with me. But then if I say you're always mean, you're always cruel, you're always bad, that's not. But if I say sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're not. So life is a gray area, but the way we perceive our life is based on what's most important to us. So whether we're crystal clear in our values or we're not crystal clear, we always make decisions based on seeing more benefits than drawbacks, because that's our animalistic nature. We're always going towards pleasure and trying to avoid pain. And we've been programmed from many, 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 many different hierarchies of our parents, our grandparents, that genetic evolution of DNA has actually been embedded into us to help us, to try to protect us from trauma, from being eaten from a tiger. So it's not a bad program that's been upregulated into us, but however, there's not really tigers running around anymore. So our defense system and our processing unit actually needs to be upgraded and changed.
So we have a couple of people that are not able to connect this to how this is going to relate to grief. And I know we're getting into that now. But one thing I do want to say is that obviously when we have lost people that we've loved, you know, we are not in an emotional great place. And it's very easy to be reactive to some of the principles that we're going to talk about tonight. So I just want to encourage everyone to just kind of take a moment and sit with some of these principles, because these are not based on opinion. These are actually based on the science that Dr. Nick is talking about. So being able to ask better questions, because if you're confused or you feel triggered in the moment, put it in the chat box and we're happy to clarify, because this is going to be something that can definitely, it's a completely different type of work than what we are used to in the realm of therapy. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Dr. Nick.
Yeah, of course. And if you are grieving now, or are still going through grief, you will probably get triggered through this webinar, because what a trigger is a perception of a past experience. And I don't say that to be like scientific and like a robot, but we will continue to be triggered until our perception changes to be more balanced and to be able to see both the good and the bad. And I'm going to go through some myths, break the myths, and then towards the end of that, I'm actually going to go through, and I'm not going to fully take someone through this, but I'm going to take you through the steps so you can actually see and understand the process a lot more clear. So myth 1, if you don't grieve, you didn't love them. So this was actually my very first quote unquote case of doing a grief collapse with the DiMartini method that my client told me is, but I have to grieve. If I don't grieve, I won't show my love to them. And that is a foundation of really combining two misunderstood platforms. So if we think of what love is like sharing somebody, celebrating somebody, literally taking everything in from them and loving them. When you look at what grief is created from a perception that something has been lost. So like I was telling before, is that we live in a world of duality. Duality means that there's cause and effect. So if something has been lost, being lost has nothing to do with showing love, but actually has everything to do with perception of lost. So when we think of lost being a cause, what's the effect for that? So the effect is the grief. So the grief is the effect, the loss is the cause. So when we look at really expressing love, we can't love somebody if we perceive them as missing. So in order to actually go back and share our love for them, what we need to do is go through and change our belief system that something is missing, and be able to see that energy is not created or destroyed, it's only transformed into new forms. So we'll get deeper into this, but as we go through and we can see the new forms that that's what we're grieving. We're not grieving the miss of the person, we're grieving of what they gave us that we perceive as missing. So that will make more sense, and kind of like all of this is literally pre-framing to get you more excited and more excited, maybe more frustrated, but then at the end, we're really going to put this all together for you. Myth number 2, nothing could ever replace them. There is such a void in my life since I have lost them. And when I wrote this myth, it was one of the things that have been said, but I put it as them, as people. But we can truly be grieving the loss of anything. We can be grieving the loss of a pet. We can be, during Sandy for Jerseyites, I did DiMartini with people that literally were grieving the loss of a house, grieving the loss of things. Anything that is perceived loss that we hold important to us, that we are receiving something from, we're going to have more grief. Because when you think about grief, grief is different when you study it from country to country. There's some countries that they don't grieve at all, and death is just a celebration, because that is the platform, and the perception of death is that it's not a loss. It's actually a gain for the society as well as the person and the afterlife that they go to. So when we have our attachments to something, that's not necessarily the truth for the entire world. It's just our truth in that moment, because that's the perception that's created from our belief systems. So going back to nothing could ever replace them as a person, it could be nothing can ever replace my house, my home where I raise my kids. Nothing could ever replace my pet. It could be in many different forms. So The reason that is false is because, like we said, Albert Einstein figured out that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. So when nothing can replace them, there's actually nothing to replace because the energy has already been transformed in that moment in time. So the void and the pain is really from the perceived loss, not from the actual physical loss.
Can you tell a story about this? Because I think this is going to be a lot more relatable, because I know that some people are getting lost in the science aspect, but I know that this is something that it was really helpful to me when I was trying to understand this methodology.
Do you want me to? So I had set it up to do the teaching afterwards to put it all together. But if you want me to do it beforehand, I can.
I prefer just to give the example now, yeah.
Well, I mean, the example, if I go through the example, it's really just sharing the whole method itself, because otherwise it's going to just give bits and pieces, and that's going to confuse people more, honestly.
Okay.
So my goal is to honestly, and this is just from clinical experience, that not everybody, and this is just me being black and white, like literally, I love everybody for coming on here and wanting to help out and go through the grief process, because it really sets you free. But by going through the myths and the falseness of it, I literally strategize this on human behavior, because not everybody, honestly, being black and white, not everybody wants to get rid of their grief. And it's the same way of looking at that. Not everybody wants to get out of an abusive relationship. People stay in abusive relationships. Not everybody that's an addict really wants to stop being an addict. And the reason I say that is because every single decision that we make is based off of us seeing more benefits than drawbacks. There's a lot of people that want to bring their grief back into harmony, be able to share a stronger version of love for whatever they lost, and also for themselves, and move forward on their life. But not everybody wants to do that. So if people are getting triggered, that's okay. Like, today might not be the day that you want to move forward and on with your life with not having any more grief. And that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing bad with you. We all use everything to benefit us in this life. But as soon as those benefits decrease and the drawbacks increase, then we actually want to make a change. And that's really why we're here today, is to help you, if you're in that moment in time, to be able to make a change, collapse your grief, share the love, and move on with your life. So, myth, I forget which 2-1, but grief is a normal and healthy way of processing loss. So, grief is a normal response to a loss, but it's not a healthy way to process loss. Because, like we said, grief is an effect from a cause, which is a perceived loss. And when we do that, that stress affects our body in so many different ways. Our grief impairs our immune system, because our immune system is really made up of our nervous system and the microflora, your microbiome, the small cells pretty much that line your gastrointestinal system. So your immune system is a sensory system. So if we are sensing very strong emotions, which are polarized and unbalanced, that stress will actually decrease the functioning of our nervous system, possibly get stored within our stomach. We've all gotten nervous. Like, this is kind of a gross story, but I got so nervous in every single football game that I ever played, I would always have loose stools before. So we know that our nerves, our tension, our stress can really change how we're functioning physically as well. Grief can create a lot of sleep disruption. That also goes back to the processing through the nervous system. When we're grieving, we're more on a threshold of a sympathetic, which is our fight or flight response. That doesn't allow our body to heal, which is the parasympathetic stress response. But what affects our sleep is if we get stuck in that sympathetic state, that fight or flight that really going through every single day, what happens is that our cortisol really gets really high, and cortisol and melatonin are inversely related. So when at night, when our melatonin should be high and we're trying to fall asleep, if we've been ramped up from our grief, literally creating a sympathetic stress response, then our cortisol is going to be high, and it's not going to allow us to get good quality sleep. And then that's when things get worse, they get worse, and they get worse, because if we can't sleep, we can't heal. And then we wake up and we're fatigued, and then we're stressed. And then we're literally on the edge and the brink of reacting because we can't hold on to our life and have our quote unquote shit together. And then we end up getting in all these little fights that don't serve us. So it tends to be a waterfall effect, and that goes in and it can create, like I said, changes within the stomach, the gastrointestinal system. It can create anxiety and panic. And anxiety and depression are literally that duality aspect that are always going back and forth. And then it can even bring up aspects of PTSD.
So I want to make a quick comment. I see a lot of the different comments that are coming through, and I just want to say that, we're talking about a lot of different elements here, from everything from physical to physiological to mental, emotional, because grief is complicated and there are so many layers to it. And I know that a lot of us want some type of magic solution in order to work through the grief. But I promise you, be patient and try to take a moment to process some of these different things, because this is complicated. This is why you have grief and this is how you get rid of it, because every single one of you are extremely, extremely different. You have some of you that are storing your emotions in your organs that are causing you to feel physically ill. And I know a couple of people said, no, I have physical heartbreak. You do. If that's what you feel, you do. And some of you have mental and emotional heartbreak. You don't have the ability to process anything mentally. Some of you have probably slipped into some type of chronic illness or autoimmune condition after dealing with grief and loss. So every single person's approach to getting better is actually very different. But step number one is being able to potentially start to shift how we are perceiving this event. Because again, we know this is not easy. This is so hard when you lose people that you love. But knowing that, this is something that potentially is holding you back in so many different avenues of your life, that the grief consumes you. And you don't even have an opportunity to have a life, create a new relationship, have a friendship, or have something that lights you up and brings you joy, because you're so paralyzed. And I want you guys to understand that, we are not necessarily numb to your situations. We are completely aware. We have lost people, dogs, and it is hard. It is so, so hard. But we didn't want it to paralyze our lives. And that's why we searched for other alternatives. And then we want to share it with other people. But we do know that not everyone, this is not for everyone. And that's totally okay. So if you're here and you're like, all right, I don't get it, but I really want to learn more, stick around. But if you're just like, listen, this isn't for me, my pain is too deep and I'm not going to get benefit out of this, then that's okay too. We love you, and we definitely want to make sure that this information gets to the people that really want it, that are just like, I am so tired of being paralyzed and I want to be able to get my life back.
Amen to that. And it's the method is honestly just so crazy, because my favorite quote is, the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions that you ask. So it's being able to pause, take a step back, and actually change the questions that you're asking yourself so you can get better quality answers, because it's the answers that we create is what we take action on. And the quality of our actions really dictates the quality of our life. And that's really what Dr. John spent the last 40 years, is creating these quality questions to take someone to actually change the perception of an event that happened, to make the perception more in balance. And I know the science is kind of crazy and it's hard for some people to understand, but it will really make sense as we go through. But I just want to add a tidbit in, is that when we had a puppy that died, actually got poisoned at a dog park in Philly, and it was a couple years before we learned the technique, and both of us didn't leave our bed for a little over 1 week. We would wake up, we'd pee, we'd jump back in bed and just cry and finally fall asleep and wake up and just cry and do it all over again. So we understand, and that was a puppy, and we both lost humans and many things in our life. But I want to say is, doing this technique, both myself and so many areas of my life, with many, many, many clients, the craziest thing is that it doesn't come back. The grief doesn't come back. And the method, the longest it's taken anybody to go through it is 3.5 hours. The shortest is 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's mind-blowing to think that you can collapse and dissolve your grief, be yourself again, live the life that you deserve to live, be able to actually share the love to the loss that you are experiencing by loving yourself and serving yourself. When we lose someone or we lose something, if they loved us too, like Dr. Nicole said at the beginning, is they don't want us to suffer for their loss. They want us to go out and shine our light as strong as we possibly can, to be able to show how much that person really affected us. That if that person really gave us so much of themselves, they invested in us. And how are we actually going forward with that investment? Are we using it to love ourselves, to love humanity, to bring goodness to the world? Or are we going to stay in grief and not actually express everything that they gave us that we can actually share to the world? I'm a little passionate about this. Time is the only thing. Time is the only thing that can heal my pain. So, as we know, grief will last a lifetime. Time doesn't heal the pain. What time does is it can actually act as a distraction. If we go longer and longer and longer, which people say it will hurt less, the hurt never becomes less. That's bullshit. What happens is we become distracted. So we think about it less, and it doesn't hurt when we're not thinking about it. But that pattern, energy is cyclical. So it's still going around. And soon as we get something to remind us, boom, the grief comes back, and it hurts just as much as it happened yesterday. So time, honestly, time doesn't heal anything. The only thing that heals something is by changing our belief system around something to be able to change our perception about something. There's only 3 things that we can control in our life. And if you have a piece of paper, literally write this down if that's the only thing you take away from the seminar. Because so much of society right now is doing and acting literally crazy because they think they should be able to control everything, and they can't. The only things we can control is our perception. And from our perceptions, we make a decision. We can control our decisions. When you break down the word decision, it's decide. Decide means to kill. Homicide, pesticide, herbicide. Decide means to kill. So we're killing every single other opportunity and only working with one going forward to take action. And action is the very last thing that we can control. So we can control our perceptions, our decisions, and our actions. That's it. So if we were to literally understand that and own that and use those principles for the rest of our life, and everything that we can't control, just let it be and love it and use it for what it is, humanity wouldn't have to fight so much, and we could work together. We wouldn't have to fight ourselves so much, and we could use ourselves to really help ourselves and love ourselves, do amazing things. Next myth. I am so devastated. I am so scared that I'm going to lose the people I love. So this is a myth that's connected to grief, but it actually has very little to do with grief. Because when you look at it, it actually comes from a state of fear. And you collapse fear completely different than how we collapse grief. But when we look at fear, fear stands for false evidence appearing real. And there's really only two types of fear. When you think about it foundationally, the most simplistic way we can think about fear is that we fear a gain of a negative, a drawback, a pain, or we fear the loss of a pleasure, a positive, a benefit. So foundationally, those are the only two things that we can fear. So once we actually get clear on what we're perceiving, you're going to stop changing the slides.
I didn't do anything. Look, there's my hands.
That's weird. So, got some ghost in here. The only thing that we can, now I forgot what I was even talking about, but
we're talking about fear and gaining the drawbacks or losing benefits.
Yep. So the only thing that we can possibly fear is the fear of losing something that we want, a positive, or gaining something that's actually going to cause us pain. So when we get clear on what really the perceived loss or gain is, that positive or negative, then we take that, because we understand and realize through physics that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if we're fearing the loss of a gain of a negative, then what would be the equal and opposite of that? And then own that both to, this is science, not to confuse people, but when you look at it, we have to own the magnitude, the intensity of it, as well as the duration, the longevity of it. And when you understand energy, energy is in the form of a wavelength. So when
don't go to the wavelengths. Come on.
When you balance out that wavelength, then we can be free.
So I think a really good example was the first thing that I got introduced to when it comes to Dr. DeMartini is he talked about some of the most negative events that have happened in the world. One of them being the bubonic plague, which killed millions upon millions of people, that when most people would talk about something like the bubonic plague, they would discuss the negatives of how many people it killed and how detrimental it was to the world. And when he started to actually list off the positives and to really acknowledge that it was in perfect balance. And one of the biggest driving forces behind that bubonic plague was the fact that it completely transformed the sanitation systems, which then transformed healthcare because there was such an elimination of infectious disease because there was improvements in sanitation and hygiene. So this was something that was like so interesting to me when he was deducting these different events and showing that there was perfect balance in the event of both. And this is something that really sat with me. So every time I have something that I perceive as a negative, I really try to think like, what's the other side of it that, you know, I'm not seeing? And maybe that's in the current moment that there's a positive happening, or is it like, hey, this sucks really bad right now, but is this going to actually lead to an opportunity or lead to something positive later? And this just takes asking better questions and taking a moment for acknowledgement. So if you can even take that one piece away of when you are getting emotionally triggered or when you do have something coming up for you, is asking that question, what is this? Where is this coming from? You know, is it polarized? Is this really just one-sided, or is that the only side that I see? And this is something that is very empowering. You don't have to have the answer in the moment, but you might start to probe a different perception by asking better questions.
Next myth. They were in perfect health. How did this happen? So I started the myths all based on grief, but then these last couple ones that we're going to tackle, they're not so much connected with grief, but there are a lot of questions that I had taking people through the grief collapse. And this question actually occurred from a woman after we collapsed, and I'm kind of weirdly, oddly, a dick at the very end, because I want to push whoever I'm working with to make sure that their perception's actually even and balanced. And she started laughing when I became a dick to her. But she finished and she goes, I do have one question. She goes, it seemed like he was in such perfect health. Like, how did this happen? And I smiled and I replied, not being in a dick, that no one's in actually perfect health. Dr. Nicole and I, we're not in perfect health. And our lifestyle is very clean. But what happens is that some people are more resilient than others. But when we do labs, and we do a lot of lab testing, and we do a lot of other integrative testing, but every single person comes up with toxins and infections, and toxins can be environmental toxins. It could be heavy metals. We can have mold. We can have viruses, parasites. But I'm saying, like, per person, every person has multiple of these. Every person that we challenge and check and evaluate has multiple heavy metals, multiple viruses. Usually they have 1 or 2 parasites. Honestly, the CDC said 1 in 4, and the way they evaluate parasites is horrendous, so it's probably every single person has parasites. So it's really about, when you're looking at the health of a human being, it's really getting down to just the quality of every single system, because unfortunately, what we say is perfect health in our society is only looking at blood work and a very small snippet of blood work. So when you actually increase your data points, we have more opportunities to be objective and to be able to make that, I guess, positive change, if you want to say, or a healthy change.
I think that this is just really important, going back to the previous slide about fear, is that there's a lot of us that fear the loss of our parents. We fear the loss of individuals in our life. And, you know, we potentially fear that because we fear what's going to happen to their health, what's going to happen when they get older. And that's why I think that this is really relevant, because people need to know that there is an opportunity to be proactive when it comes to that. And we live in a model that it's don't fix it until it's broke. And unfortunately, even mild symptoms are classified as our normal. So we're often not knowing what's going on. And, you know, the first sign of a heart attack is a heart attack. And sometimes that heart attack is fatal and sometimes it is not. So, you know, we really, in order to reduce some of that fear around the possible loss of individuals, is, you know, really thinking about, you don't know what you don't know. And if you're not leveraging better questions and better testing, then it's really impossible for people to know exactly where their health stands. And, you know, this is definitely something that I do think is important to reduce that fear, which is another paralyzing emotion.
Next myth. This is so horrible, I am devastated. So going back, the foundational principles is literally everything for this, is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if something horrible occurred, something equal and opposite has to occur. Something horrible, what's the opposite of horrible? Something amazing. So once we can go through and actually with clarity see that there was an equal and opposite, but not only was there just one equal and opposite, we want to do it many, many times. So it's really the act of compounding that's going to change our belief system by something. Just seeing one difference or one positive, that's not enough to actually go and change neurologically to hit the threshold to change our belief systems. So when we were going through, like you said before, is a lot of what we have surrounding death is really fear, and surrounding loss is fear. And like I said, fear is coming from that, you know, loss or a gain. But even more simply, fear is coming from a loss of clarity and a loss of understanding. So first, it's impossible to truly have clarity or understanding when we have an imbalanced mindset, because when I went back and talked about data, you think about, if we're just seeing the positives and the good in something, we have half of the data points. So, you know, the positive thinkers out there, you're attracting the equal and opposite, you're attracting to be sad. But if you're constantly trying to be positive, we're actually putting blinders on to the bad, the negatives that happen. And it's part of life. Like, bad shit happens every single day, but good things happen too. And if we can see both, we can actually use both. We can use the good and the bad to serve us. But if we're only focusing on the positives and we're not seeing the negatives, sooner or later we're going to get smacked in the face and get knocked down because we were ignoring what was been there the entire time. And we'll be like, well, where did this come from? And I was like, well, you made shitty decisions because you were only focused on half the data. So if we saw all of the data, we'd actually be able to make, quote unquote, better perceptions, better decisions, better actions. It's a very simple process, and it can be used for many, many different aspects of our life. And when we do, we become self-empowered and we can serve us and as well as help others. The next myth, holidays will never be the same. This one's actually true and false. It's true. When we lose a family member or we lose a pet or we lose a house that we spent holidays in, those holidays, they will be different. They will never be the same. That is true. But the falseness of it is that different doesn't have to be worse, doesn't have to be better. It's just different. So we can be a victim of our circumstances, or we can use our circumstances to serve us. You know, there's so many times of stories that I've heard just from clients working with and checking back in with them, or them reaching out to kind of give me an update on how they're doing. But as so many of, quote unquote, our losses, we can capitalize on. And I know that sounds really shitty in the moment, especially when we are in that moment of grieving. But let's say in a holiday that, you know, somebody passed, now we have an opportunity to travel and we can spend holidays and create new experiences, or we can actually bring more family members in because this person didn't get along with that side of the family. And now we can grow our holidays and our experiences and share the love and more gift giving and sharing. And there's always more to a story when we can actually see more. But when we can't see more, we can't create more because our perceptions are limited.
Yeah, I definitely think that's really important, is that, you know, we've heard a lot of different stories from individuals we've worked with, and they say, you know, this was different and it really was so sad not to have this individual there, you know, but there was less turmoil, or, you know, we were able to have the whole family together because we didn't have that divide anymore. And, you know, those things are not always able, you know, you're not able to appreciate them in the moment because, of course, you want to, you know, provide that respect and love for that person who has passed. But, you know, sometimes there's a different element that is bringing a new set of experiences to the table.
So top 3 takeaways that I would like you to take. If you take other takeaways, awesome. But I really wanted to go over these 3, that nothing is ever missing in life. It is only in a different form than how we're actually looking for it. And a funny, very simple story, when I did chiropractic school out in California, and I was homesick. And really, homesick is just a version of grieving the loss of your home, and a minute version of it. So I became amazing friends with this gentleman, Devin, and he lived about, you know, half an hour, 40 minutes away from the school. And to save money, he lived at home. And I would study with him a lot, and we'd hang out, so I'd be at his house. And what I realized is that I stopped having homesickness when I realized that I pretty much had another family adopt me. So we always have everything we need and we want, but it's most of the time it's just not in the form that we want it to be in. You know, I wanted to be closer to my parents, and I missed holidays because I was too poor to fly home, or timing. I had to study and all these things. But I realized is that I still had my mom and my dad. It was just in a different form, and they were both giving me parental advice. Devin's mom was cooking me home cooked meals, and I sat down and had some quality conversations with his dad about life and about challenges. And it was literally, looking back, it was a very, very appreciative and grateful that I saw that, because then I was able to give them gratitude and respect for really what they were giving and sharing me, investing their time and energy in me. But I could have been, you know, just a friend that went to somebody's house and was pouting because I was homesick and rude to them and didn't respect that they were opening their arms in their house. But because I changed my perception and I saw that, then that was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Our perceptions dictate our feelings. If we feel like something is lost, the effect will be grief. And this is really just an expression of the cause and effect. So understanding that we live in the world of duality, it's one of the major laws that govern us, is that everything is cause and effect. Truly, the only things that aren't cause and effect is when we experience true love, grace, gratitude, and joy. And we don't experience those emotions too often, to be honest with you. When you experience those emotions, you will have literally tears of joy or tears of gratitude or tears of love. It's not a state that we experience too much, because really, I believe that one of the main reasons we're here is to learn how to love ourselves. And when we learn how to love ourselves, then we can actually learn how to love other people. But we can't give something we don't have. And it's this law of cause and effect that gives us the feedback mechanism. Most of the time it's in pain, which doesn't feel good, but luckily we can use that pain as a feedback to really change our perceptions, decisions, and actions to be able to learn how to love ourselves and then give that on to other people. The last takeaway in this method is that it can transform your perceptions and serve your life. And that's really what I'm talking about before is, not to get all mushy, but everything, and we've heard the saying is that love and gratitude are always and will be the best healers that there are. A lot of what Dr. Nicole and I do is actually more like rehab for people, because they've created so much trauma to their bodies from their diets, their lifestyle, their thinking, their lack of movement, their lack of quality movement. A lot of what we do is really just intelligent rehab. And then it's the education that's actually teaching people how to think, how to love themselves, so that they take quality actions that serve themselves and they don't have to recreate that pattern of pain and that negative feedback mechanism. So now I want to get into the nuts and the bolts for collapsing grief using the DeMartini method. So this might be a little confusing for people because I don't have the one-on-one contact. Moving forward, once we get into the new year, I'm actually going to do hot seats with people so people can actually see the method working in real life and to be able to learn from each other. But for right now, I want you to get out a piece of paper and a pencil to write on. So I'll give you just a couple seconds.
And for those of you that are, I know it's late for some people, and I know people from all over the world that are here, take a screenshot, take a picture with your phone and work on this a bit if you don't have the time to do it now. But this is definitely something that it takes time. It takes time to work through, and, you might get stuck, and that's okay if you do. But I know that some of you are going to be, potentially hopping off. And I just want to let you know that if you do want to take this a step further and work with Dr. Nick and, really be able to experience what this technique can do from a one-on-one perspective, is that we do have that available to you, and I'll make sure that you guys get a link for it. But I think it's just really important to, try to take that first step and do some of the work. But if you get stuck, just know that that's very normal. And this method was really hard for me personally. And I really worked through it quite a few times. There were times that I felt frustrated, I felt upset, I felt triggered, but it was all worth it. And I think that is just important to know, is that, sometimes the things that we need and want the most are directly outside of our comfort zone.
100%. So hopefully I gave you some time to grab a writing pencil and some paper. We're going to start on the top of the paper. We're going to write the name of what you are actually grieving, what you're perceiving as missing. Below that, I want you to make a list of what you perceive missing from that person, that place, that thing, and it has to be specific. So let's say you miss their laughter, or you miss their hugs. Let's say you miss just the jokes that they were saying. Maybe you miss their guidance. maybe you miss their wit, whatever it is for you. Start making a list for that. Clinically speaking, when we're truly honest, most people miss somewhere between, the lowest was 3, and the highest, I think, well, on average, it was 3 to probably like 12. Had one that was a pretty severe case that was in the upper 20s, but only one with that. So the majority of you, when we're honest in what you're truly missing, it's only going to be probably around 10 things, give or take a couple. So that is what we perceive as missing. So it's that list that's actually causing our grief. And what we need to do is to change our perception around those attributes, that list of things that are missing. Object on the list, whether it's a trait, an action, or an inaction, whatever you listed in that number 1, we're going to go through and see, because it wasn't destroyed, where it just transferred to a new form or new 4 M's. So it can go to one or many different forms. Mm-hmm. And that's the number 1 foundational law of all creation, is the law of 1 to the many and many to the 1. That could be a whole different other webinar.
Well, an example is really if one of the primary traits is he or she used to make me laugh, then thinking about, who is making you laugh or what is making you laugh now.
But it has to be who's making you laugh like they did.
Yes.
So that's sometimes where people can get very specific to be able to unlock both of those and then join them when they're balanced and then transcend them up to the super consciousness. So let's say it was laughter. We'll use that. So we'll go, all right, Joe makes me laugh. Does the laughter that Joe creates for you, is that equal to, almost like thinking we have a scale, is that equal to the laughter that you perceived as missing? If yes, awesome, that was easy. If no, then it's more than 1. So who else makes you laugh like the perceived laughter that we're missing? Mary, awesome. Does Joe and Mary, does that pretty much on the scale, is that equal? Nope, this laughter is still more. All right, so who else? We have Joe. Because we have a perception that we're really missing the old form, we think that the old form probably has more benefits than drawbacks, and the new form probably has more drawbacks than benefits. They're constantly making fun of other people, so that's a drawback. What's another drawback? Well, actually, from that, I lost a friend because I valued this person more than my friend, and they were making fun of them all the time, so they stopped hanging out at the house. That's another drawback. So you go through and you list as many drawbacks until you can actually see that the drawbacks that you listed are equal to the benefits that you originally perceived, until that's balanced out. And then you go to the new form of laughter. So we think that the new form is not as good as the old form, hence that it has more drawbacks than benefits. So then we actually want to look for benefits. So what's a benefit of, the laughter that Phil gave me? Well, Phil creates cartoons. It doesn't hurt anybody. That's a benefit. What's another benefit? I don't know what names I used. Ben, Jerry, John, James, Fred. We'll use Fred. So what's the benefit that Fred gave me? Okay, so Fred, when he made people laugh, he actually uplifted them. He made people laugh, but he made them laugh by kind of making a joke of something that they're really proud about. So it actually made them feel really good about themselves when they created laughter. That's another benefit. So you keep going through the different benefits until the benefits are actually equal.
Let me just intervene really quick. So a lot of people are having a lot of issues with the connection. So there is a really bad storm here. So I think that that's part of the issue. So if anyone is catching this right at this moment, we will make sure to send you the replay. So I'm going to send that as a message right now. Okay. So there's definitely a lot of people that have to hop off because there's a lot of issues. So I want to make sure that we can get through the rest of this.
Well, that's I mean, that was pretty much the end of the example. Of first, you make a list of everything that you perceive as missing. Then you go through and you see where that's transferred into the new forms until the new forms balance out the old form. And then you have to go to the old form, balance out the benefits and the drawbacks, and the new form balance out the benefits and the drawbacks. And when everything is in balance, guess what? There's no more cause of loss. Nothing is actually perceived as missing anymore. We can see where everything's at. And I want to share a story it's not my favorite story of the whole grief, but it's probably one of the most beautiful stories. My favorites are the really hard ones to crack, because that's my job. But this was done Zoom. They were all the way across the country, and it almost stopped a wedding from happening. So this bride-to-be, her dad had passed quite suddenly, and it was, I think, 3 days till she was supposed to get married, and she couldn't imagine how she was possibly going to get married with all of this grief. And everywhere she looked, she just saw that she wouldn't enjoy her wedding because all she'd be thinking about was the loss of her father. And literally went through the grief collapse, the DiMartini method. It took just under 3 hours with her. And she literally had tears of gratitude that she had neutralized it so much and was so grateful. And I knew for me that I was happy for her, but the true test was going to be, in 3 days when she was getting married. And I got literally, because it was California time, and I had a text just after what would have been her wedding, and it was just saying, thank you so much. And we had a follow-up call early next week, and she said, going through the grief collapse, it literally made my wedding better than I could have ever imagined it. She goes, because you transfer the losses that she had to other people, the majority of those other people were at her wedding. So every time she looked at somebody during the wedding, she saw a piece of her dad. And she said she almost cried every single time because she was emotional, she was getting married, but she saw the beauty that her dad wasn't missing at all, that his energy had just transferred to so many new forms, and all of those forms were there celebrating her big day, her wedding day. And I just thought that was one of the most beautiful aspects of understanding the DiMartini method and how it can actually collapse grief to not just, keep you from not experiencing grief, but to actually, send love back to the person in the forms that all the teachings and everything that they gave you, those biggest things, you still get to give to it. You still get to give to that person that isn't physically here with us anymore, but you still get to have a connection with them because their energy still is. And that is one of the most beautiful pieces of what John DiMartini has given us. And I love literally handing that off and helping people deal with their losses and their emotional imbalances every single day, because I also get to see the side effects of what that creates.
Yeah, that was an amazing story with her. I know exactly who you're talking about, and her life has really been transformed from this work. But, I know that this was a lot of information, and some of you are processing and some of you are like, what the hell did I sign up for? But, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to mental health, emotional health, is that, we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know that other techniques are out there outside of psychotherapy, outside of, medication. A lot of us don't know. And that's what we're here to do, is to really help to give more options to the people that are looking for it. And, we understand this is a difficult process. And I personally really struggled with implementing the DiMartini method on my own. I was very reactive. I felt a lot of things that came up emotionally, and it was really hard for me to process. But, Since then, we've really brought both of our expertise together. And Dr. Nick and I have been talking about this for a really long time because he's been offering the DiMartini method privately for a lot of patients. And I was like, you know what? I am so heartbroken listening to how many kids are being bullied, how many kids are committing suicide, how many people are getting divorced, and how many people are just struggling every single day, hating their jobs, hating, their boss, and just not enjoying life. And I really wanted to bring both of our expertise together to bring a lot of information to people and do it in a virtual way that it's easily accessible. So this is some of the map that we have for next year, but we're talking about anxiety, depression, toxic relationships, being in a toxic relationship with yourself, transforming your relationship from life sucking, life fulfilling. That was my title. Acknowledging and mastering your triggers. Imagine not getting triggered. Imagine being free of getting triggered by other people. Like, how awesome would that be? Overcoming catastrophic thinking. How many teens have catastrophic thinking? I broke up with my boyfriend. The end of the world is happening because of that. And is it fear? Is it fear or is it lack of control? How many of us want to control every single thing in our lives, and when we can't, we freak the hell out. So we're trying to bring as many diverse topics about bullying, things that are friendly to teenagers, adults, being resilient to emotional adversity, to being resilient to racism, being resilient to violence, trauma, PTSD, overcoming the I am not enough mindset. And really one of the best things in December too is mastering your mind, mastering your life, starting the new year right. Going through this series and building off of it, of how you show up differently for yourself, how differently you talk to yourself, how differently you show up in your relationships, and being able to build that strong foundation and then be able to step into 2022 as a completely different person. So I'm going to throw up here, if you guys want more information about our series next year, you can click that link below. You're going to get an email with the replay. I'm also going to make sure you guys get an email with the replay that you can fast forward, because I know that a lot of you listened to the majority and it started to break up at the end. So you're going to have a YouTube link as well as having the webinar jam link. So we'll make sure you get both. But the online series is pretty awesome. So it's going to be a small group. So it's going to be interactive. So we actually are going to have you guys hopping on and doing some hot seats. We're going to make sure that you're getting your questions answered live and working through your obstacles of where you're stuck on those specific topics. So the content is going to be built around your surveys. So you actually are going to send us personalized information as to, like, what do you want to cover in the realm of what makes you anxious? What do you want to cover in the realm of the biggest struggles in your relationships? So this is pretty amazing that it gets to be customized to you. And we're going to make sure that we get your questions answered, because it is going to be small group. You're going to walk away with tools and perspective that you can implement immediately. So obviously the topics we're going to be talking about in the future, there's a lot of tools that you can apply right away for how you can communicate differently with your boss, with your spouse, with your kids. Grief is probably the hardest topic. So for those of you that are here that are just like, wow, this is awesome, but I don't even know what to do with it, take advantage of hopping on a call with our team and maybe talk through what the DiMartini method looks like, that, you work one-on-one with Dr. Nick so that, you can go through this process and get your own personal benefit, because we know that every single one of you are dealing with something completely different. So again, we talked about, our small groups and then working with Dr. Nick. The cool thing about working with Dr. Nick is he's not necessarily just going to help grief or loss, but also helping you to understand how your voids have dictated the values in your life. And what that really means is that is your beliefs. That's what you feel like is the best way to live your life. But it's also why you get pissed off, triggered, is when people don't agree with your beliefs and your values. So it's really important for us to have that foundation as we move into the emotional work. And that's how you're able to figure out your story. Because I can guarantee you have a reoccurring theme in your life. You may have had abandonment as a child, and that is why your grief is so much heavier than maybe someone else who's been through a similar situation. So understanding that there is sometimes a foundational piece as to why the grief is so debilitating. So our biggest thing is getting rid of the old model and starting to introduce a new model. And as people work with us, sometimes we're figuring out that there are these major physiological problems. There's autoimmune conditions and inflammatory issues that are causing their brain to be haywire, which is causing them to have so many more issues with how they are emotionally showing up in their life. So it's asking better questions, it's digging deeper, it's doing better testing, and it's evolving with the times and using new and improved methodologies, and not thinking that there's something wrong with you, or thinking like I'm doomed and there's no solutions and I'm never going to get through this, because there are options that are out there. And I really feel like we forget that being well is about having answers and solutions. You know, we settle for, well, we don't know what caused it. We don't know what the cure is. There is no cure. Well, we're just going to give you something to feel comfortable, or to palliate your symptoms, or palliate your depression, or palliate your grief. And we're not always being given answers. What is the cause? What is the reason why I can't overcome this? What is the reason why this is so debilitating? And what else is out there for me to heal? So I know we've had a lot of different questions as we went. And I know that a lot of you have had some different connection issues. If there are any specific burning questions that you want to pop in here, we will definitely make sure to answer them. And if you watch the replay, you can still populate questions that we can answer at a later time. So don't think that you don't have that opportunity later. But I just want to let you guys know that this is obviously an educational experience, but when you do the work and you're guided through the work, that's really when you have the breakthroughs. And that's when you really can transform your mind, your health, your life. And I really hope you guys take an opportunity to take advantage of taking this a step further, and, you know, showing up to maybe some of our series next year, as well as potentially taking advantage of working with Dr. Nick. But I hope that you got value out of this, and I really hope that this was thought-provoking. I know that not everyone is going to walk away and be like, wow, I have no more grief. But being able to have that, you know, sense of asking better questions of, where is this trait that I feel a void with, and where is it showing up in my life? And, you know, how can I acknowledge that, and how can I embrace that, and how can I still continue to love that individual, but not allow it to consume my life, and not allow me to do the things that I love. But we love all of you. We have so much compassion for all of you. We know that, you know, grief is difficult, and we know that it is so difficult to lose loved ones. But I really commend you for being here, and I commend you for taking a step to try to have a different alternative to just, you know, dealing with the grief or letting time pass. So is there any final words that you want to share, Dr. Nick?
Yes, and there was one question that came in at the very end as well, so I want to answer that. But, you know, Foundation, I just want to say thank you for everybody that stayed on. I know this, you know, science is usually not sexy to be able to listen to, and grief is never fun to bring up. So hopefully you got some tools that you can use yourself. Like I said, one of the things that when it comes to the DeMartini method is, once you learn the method, you can use the method yourself to collapse and bring a lot of our imbalanced emotions back into balance. But the times where you really need a facilitator, and John's a little crazy with the mathematics, that he literally found in mathematics to, when we are over a 1-to-7 or a 7-1 ratio of really just quote unquote how wide our blinders are on, if we're too blind to see the benefits or the drawbacks depending on how we're working, then that's when you know you have to have a facilitator to help guide you, to be able to see those things, to ask the quality questions that will probe and open more doors, open more awareness, open more consciousness. It's really, it's not the most fun and enjoyable thing to go through, but it's just short aspect. You know, it's literally only a couple hours of your life, and it's an order of consequence. You know, most of us, we want to avoid, you know, starting with pain in order to come out the end with pleasure. But that's goes through every aspect of life. You know, it's like you sit down and you can have a choice to eat the cake, or you can, you know, go through pain, not have the cake and exercise, but then the results, the second order consequences are really going to be what serves you. And you're worth it. So I really wanted to go through the question. I think it was from Karen, who had experienced some losses, and really, you know, not jumping too deep with you, Karen, but, you know, how do you start to figure out your life? You first have to figure out your highest values, what's most important to you. When things happen in our life, whether they're traumas or large events, what's most important to us changes. So what used to be most important to you is probably different now. And if we keep living our life based on the old version of yourself, it's going to create a lot of pain. So we have to get crystal clear on the person you are now. And once getting crystal clear on what's most important to you now, really going forward with life is to figure out how to fill that up. So getting clarity on your highest values and then connecting everything in your life to serve those values is going to be the foundation. And then when we're there, if you still have that grief, I would say it's about neutralizing and bringing that grief into harmony so that you can actually take steps and serve those highest values. Because when we have grief, when we have guilt, when we have shame, all of those emotions are really like
Can anyone else see Dr. Nick? All right, I guess I have to finish it because we completely lost him. So again, I want to thank you guys. And like Dr. Nick was saying is, you know, people change, and that is a good thing. And it's definitely, you know, taking that look at what has changed and what are your values. Values are, you know, not the easiest thing to figure out. By the way, I was called the stubborn little bitch by Dr. DeMartini. So like I said, this technique is amazing, but it is not always super easy to get through. But it's being able to acknowledge, you know, where you're at and what are some of the things that are driving your thoughts and decisions every day. And from there, you're able to take that information into the method to start really nailing down, you know, what are you holding on to? Is it truly grief? Is it shame? Is it abandonment? Is it some other type of emotion? Here he is. And being able to then go from there. So it's multifaceted, I think, is the biggest thing to take away. But you know, it's all work that is possible, especially through the use of a facilitator. But I know that it is late for a lot of you, and you know, this has been a little bit longer than we expected. But we do want to send a lot of love and compassion to all of you, and we hope to see you in the new year. And take advantage of some of the amazing things we're going to be talking about on the foundation of integrative medicine, but also in the foundation of the DeMartini method.
Stay safe. Happy holidays.